It was a very tense household. My father had a lot of issues with anger. It was a difficult upbringing.
Willy Handler's parents, Ella and Shifra Handler, also survived the Nazis. Most of their family didn't. Their world here, he says, was small, lonely, yet crowded by the war.
My parents didn't have much of a social circle, so even they didn't see very many people. To some extent, it was like maybe the war never really ended.
There's a place for us, somewhere a place for us, peace and quiet and open air, wait for us somewhere. There's a time for us, someday a time for us, time together with time to spare, time to learn, time.
Like, hate doesn't resolve anything. You know, you may be able to, in destroying those who you hate, you destroy yourself as well. That humanity is not going to survive. You know, the theory is that trauma is stored in your body, can be stored genetically as well, and then it's easily passed on. And so obviously it's in my gene. And really, what's the best way of countering this? It's talking about it, not holding it in. And that goes without saying for any kind of trauma. My goals is to break the cycle and help others break the cycle. You're starting to see it in the next generation, not just the next generation, but the fourth generation as well. Breaking.
This is not like, I think, an ordinary memoir. Sometimes I refer to it as an investigative memoir. So beginning the book really gives the history of my family, which I actually did not know, and I had to spend 2 years researching. My parents are no longer around, and they didn't say much.
And you're with us to experience a terrific, delightful interview with the Handlers, Willy and Marianne. And so welcome, guys. It's glad to have you here. And I think the best place for us to start is for us to share our collective memories on how we met each other, which is a very small world. So I'm going to turn it over for you, Willy, to start. Then Marianne might have a completely different feeling of how this happened. And I have my feeling. So we'll triangulate on this discussion. So Willy, take it from there.
Yeah, okay. We met in 1979, and I was working at a rehab facility. I was an assistant administrator, one of the many careers I've had in my life. None of them I did that well.
That's not true.
And I guarantee that she will disagree with everything I say from here on in. And Marianne had a degree in hospitality and tourism, and was working for the food service company at the facility, and she was an intern. Do I have it right so far?
Correct.
Okay, there you go. And that's the story.
A manager training. That's not really the whole story.
And you know, there was this, you know, nice looking lady serving me, I don't know, corned beef hash or something. I don't know what it was. And so I decided to ask her out. And she said no a couple of times, and then she relented because of, I don't know, my charm or good looks. I'm not quite sure which one it was. And we dated. We went out on a date, and then we went on another one, and then she told me I had to marry her, or else, something like that.
Okay.
That was like, that's the shortened version, without all the
All right,
nitty gritty.
Marianne, you gotta weigh in here because I think maybe there's something missing here.
Okay, so he relented and he had to ask me out a number of times. I didn't want to go
That's what I
out.
said.
I didn't want to go out with him because we worked at the same place. He was my supervisor's boss, and I don't agree with going out with people who you work with. So I thought, okay, I don't want to create hard feelings. So I got some hockey tickets to the Leaf game. And I'm not a hockey fan.
You have to tell them you're based where, so we ever.
Toronto.
Okay.
So for
And by the way, the Leafs were playing Philadelphia that night.
I have no idea. So anyway, I went into his office with these Leaf tickets. And you would have thought I walked in with $1 million. He was all over the schedule because I said, pick a game, I'll take you to a hockey game. And I thought, that's it. So he picked a game. We went out for dinner beforehand. We went to the hockey game, and then it was history.
Well, that's a fabulous story. Now it continues.
I think so. There was like no conflict there at all in versions, was there?
No.
Well, except when we were going up the escalator to our seats, my dad was at the top of the escalator like this.
We're going to get to your dad in a minute, but I want to make sure, I want to clarify that you're both the second gens, right?
No,
No? Okay.
I am. She's a
Convert.
she's a Jew by choice.
Good. Okay, well, that's great. Welcome to the tribe.
I've been part of the tribe longer than I was the other side.
I see. Very good. Well, I want to add a funny story because when I first was introduced to Willie by my very close friend in South Africa, Zola Schumann.
We're going to meet next month.
Yeah, nice. And she's coming to town, or you're going there?
No, we're going down there.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, great. Well, you give her a hug for me. So I got an email from Willie, and he has a little thumbnail picture in the corner of his email. And I said, God, I know that face somewhere, but I couldn't place it. And I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it. And so we met, Willie and I met on a Zoom call to set this up. And I said, Willie, before we start, I think I know you. Do I know you from somewhere? Have we met somewhere? Are you a member of my community? Have you come to a Zoom? What? And he said, no, not at all. So I just kept thinking and thinking, couldn't understand where it was. And then there was about a 5-minute rest in the conversation. We would continue to go. And Willie said, well, did you make a film? Did I appear in your film? My wife and you? I said, oh my God, that's where I knew you. So why don't you take that story a little further, because you indicated to me that there was more to that story than I knew. So go ahead. You know what I'm referring to?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. In fact, I just noticed you released a new doc, and on epigenetics, and I plan on watching it either today or tomorrow.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
We enjoyed your documentary that we watched where Willie was in.
Yeah, well, Willie told me that you practically fell off the couch, and all of a sudden he saw himself in the film, and you were in the film interviewed as well. And I said, oh my God. So that's how we met. It's a very small world that and I didn't know. For the audience, just to give you some background, you did an interview. It was called Generations Apart, What We Carry. And I think you saw it for the very first time as you were watching the film. You didn't know you were even in the film.
No.
All of a sudden you saw yourself being part of the film. So that must have been quite something, actually. So, Willie and Marianne, I'm glad you're together. We want to start this discussion. Well, we've already had some fun laughs, and we're going to have many more. But Will, you're going to take a second, give us a little bit about your parents, their history, you growing up as in a survivor home, and we'll start there. And certainly, Marianne, any one time you want to add and contribute, just raise your hand.
Certainly. My parents had very different experiences, but they were both survivors. My father was Polish. He was born in a very small village in central Poland called Wislica. When he was a late teen, the family moved to a larger city to escape anti-Semitism, but as well, it was at the start of the Depression, and they were, I no doubt, looking for better opportunities. So they moved into a town called Benzin. The entire family moved, and he was there when the war broke out. And in 1940, he got married in the ghetto. And he and his wife,
Which
Esther,
ghetto? Is that the Warsaw Ghetto or the Lodz Ghetto?
Benzin ghetto.
Okay, very good.
Right. So that entire region had two ghettos, one in Benzin and one in Sosnowiec. There were two adjoining towns, and so everybody in the region, all the Jewish residents in the community, different small towns, were all moved to the two ghettos. And he was married. He got married in 1940. Had one child in 1940, and the following year had a second child, two girls. He was deported in April of 42 and began 3 years of bouncing around from one forced labor camp to another until he was in total he was at 7 camps. He survived, I guess, partly because of his age and his ability to work. And he was finally liberated in April of 1945. He lost his family in the summer of 42. His wife and children were shipped to Auschwitz and gassed.
And who was the liberating force? Was it the Russians or the U.S.?
Oh, he was in Besigen, I believe is the name of the camp. It was in Germany, very close to the Swiss border, and it was the French army that liberated him. And so for the first little while following the war, he was sort of in the French district. And I actually have a French ID card, or at least a copy of it. And then he moved to Munich and was sort of in the American zone until he left Germany. My mother was Romanian. She was actually 12 years younger than my father. So she was a teenager when the war broke out. She was in a very tiny village. About 1,000 people or so, maybe a little bit more, and 20 Jewish families. And so the history of Holocaust in Romania was very different. The Romanian government was aligned with the Axis power, and then they kind of switched sides. But in 1941, Romanian soldiers and civilians had a pogrom in the village, and the Jewish homes were all destroyed. Some were killed. The survivors were forced to move to a larger town called Sucheva. They were there for a year. And then there were about 7,000 Jews in Sucheva, and at that time, and because they came from neighboring communities, and they were all deported to Transnistria, which was a very rural area of Ukraine, and there were several ghettos there, and she and her family were sent to a ghetto in Shagorod. It's called. There were probably about 1,000 Jews there living there, 2,000, and about 5,000 of them would join them, and they lived in a total of about 330 homes.
Yeah.
The small, dilapidated homes. So they were literally. My mother mentioned that maybe that her family lived in a closet in the basement, something like that.
Mm.
So conditions were not much better than a concentration camp, except there were no gas chambers. There was, no heating, no bathroom facilities, no running water, no food, um, and a lot of people died in the first winter of typhus. She was liberated in March of 1944 by the Russian army.
Okay, so how did your parents meet each other? Because they're in completely different places.
Right.
We
So
don't just hear that.
my mother emigrated to what was Palestine at the time in 1946. Shortly after the war, and
Can I ask
the
you?
ship.
Can I ask you how did she act?
Port now in Romania, and a ship about, I don't know, held about 1,600 Jews or something like that, and they were intercepted outside. Sorry, it was still early in that sort of migration post-war, and they were not sent to Cyprus, but they were sent to a detention camp outside of Haifa called Atlit. And she was released about 5, 6 weeks later because they had a quota of, I don't know, 10,000 Jews they would allow in. So I guess those who were detained there were included in the quota and then released. I think several months after she was released, the Haganah actually broke into Atlit and released everyone. So after that, they stopped using his detention center and sent everybody to Cyprus. So one of my uncles was detained in Cyprus until the state of Israel was received independence. My father hung out. He stayed in Germany, kind of dealt in the black market for a while, got in a little bit of trouble here and there. And in September of 48, shortly after Israeli independence, he, I believe the U.S. Army paid for his passage to Israel. And they were. That's one of the ways that they were getting rid of displaced people. My father never spent any time in a displaced persons camp. He told me there was no way he would go to one of those places. It was the same as a concentration camp. And so they met in Israel, got married there, and my sister was actually born in Israel in
And
1949.
where in Israel did they meet, and where did they get married?
I believe they got married in Tel Aviv, according to the marriage certificate I dug up. But I think the family lived, much of my mother's family, because a lot of them did survive and emigrated to Israel, lived in Herzliya.
Very interesting.
And,
Go ahead. Mary.
oh, my wife, you have something to add? Oh,
Willie's mother was first supposed to marry his aunt. And Willie's father just couldn't get along with her. She was just too domineering. And so anyway, I don't know, that broke up. and then he married Willie's mother.
Right. So he first was sort of seeing my aunt, Rachel, and they didn't get along. They clashed, and she was much closer to my dad's age. And then she went out with, and then he ended up marrying my mom, and I think my aunt was so pissed off she did not come to the wedding.
And did you have,
And they never got along.
you never reconciled?
Yeah. And my father was, back then it was interesting. So you married, survivors married to sort of reestablish their lives and have families and so on and so forth, and for security and things like that. So I'm sure there were cases where people fell in love, but that wasn't always the case. And I suspect that, my parents, there was a sort of a marriage of necessity. So
Willie, let me ask you, if you could describe your personality of your mother and then describe the personality of your father, I would be interested to hear those personality types. And then we're going to circle back and ask you, who are you like? Your mom or your father, or you're a hybrid? So why don't you give us those personality types?
So my mother was very much a people pleaser. Type that would avoid conflict, and
She loved her family. She would do anything for her family.
And she would help people, where she can, and she had a lot of empathy for people. My father was he was much more damaged than my mother, though they both were. He was very suspicious of people and mistrustful. Um, and I wouldn't say he was dishonest, but he knew how to sort of play people, and he was manipulative and very controlling. And so I guess to a certain extent that kind of marriage kind of worked out. Which one am I like?
Her mother.
More my mother, but there's still parts of my father in me. And so, which I guess is probably typical.
And Marianne, which part of the parent did you fall in love with?
You know what? I really liked them both. Willie's father was such a character. He really was. Willie's mother was warm. She would do anything for you. If you said you liked something, then she always made your favorite. Willie's father was, yeah, like Willie said, just not dishonest, but he knew how to get around things.
I call that
There's some funny stories after the war, some of the things he did, like selling diamonds that weren't diamonds and getting picked up by the police, jumping out of the.
So your parents met in Palestine, or now Israel. How long did they stay in Israel? Or what was the story behind moving from, did they come to Canada? Or how did they get to Canada? And do you also have any siblings?
Yes, I do. So my sister was born in Israel in December 49. And they were married earlier in the year. They stuck around until 1952. According to my father, he didn't like the weather. It was too hot for him. I don't think he liked the pioneer life because, Israel, early 1950s is not Israel today. And maybe the part that most motivated him is he told me he didn't survive the Nazis to be killed by Arabs. And so, he was of army age. And in fact, when he arrived, he was put in the army, and he convinced somebody that because he was a butcher, that he would be more useful in the kitchen. So
I was in the war.
very, very typical of how my father, wheeled and dealed and
And that was the
manipulated.
War of Independence that you're talking about. Correct?
Yes, the War of Independence. And he had already a brother in Canada who arrived in 1950. So they sponsored him. They made their way to France and then kind of ran out of money, and they were there for several months. I think my father found work and got enough money to get tickets on a ship that was leaving Southampton in England, and they arrived. It just March 29th, 1953. And so that was there was sort of their I
They lived.
called up my sister a couple of days ago and said, "Hey, it's your anniversary coming to Canada."
And where did they put their roots down in Canada? In your
In Toronto.
okay. So let me want to hear you speak about your growing up a little bit, your parents, and what made you choose to decide to be a Jew by choice.
Sure. I was an only child. My father was a workaholic, wasn't home very often. I was very close with my mother, and she had me when she was 19. So there wasn't a big age difference. And we spent a lot of time together because my dad wasn't around very much. So,
what was your dad working when you say he's a workaholic? What was
so my dad, during the day worked at Canada Packers. He was a sales manager, but he was always involved in hockey. In 1953, he played on the Whitley Dunlop.
58.
Oh, I'm sorry, 58, played on the Whitley Dunlops. They went to Europe. They won gold medal at the World Championships, and he always stayed involved in hockey. And he coached and managed junior teams. He scouted for the Maple Leafs, and then he became head of president of Central Scouting for the NHL.
Wow.
So he left Canada Packers when he took on the Central Scouting job.
What is Canada Packers for our audience?
Canada Packers is a meat packers in Toronto.
Okay.
Was. It's no longer around.
So it was a large meat processing company.
So he was involved in selling meat to chain stores, and he was a sales manager. So when I met Willie and we decided that we wanted to take our relationship.
And when was that? When was that?
1979.
Okay.
I said to him, "Oh, my parents are very accepting. I was brought up by my mother, who always said, you respect."
What religion you did?
I was Catholic.
Okay.
You respect everybody. Nobody's better than anybody else, and that's the way I was brought up. And then Willie's like, "Well, you're not Jewish, and there's going to be problems, and my parents aren't going to be happy." Well, it sort of turned the table. It was reversed. My father hit the roof, basically, and basically said, "Goodbye, I never want to see you again." And we thought that there would be no wedding. I decided to convert.
And your mother, how did she handle it?
She said that if you are going to go through with this, I will support you. But it was very difficult because my father wasn't speaking to us. It created problems with my parents' relationship. So I had seen cases where they were mixed families, and some people said, oh, well, the children can decide when they grow up. I wanted to have one religion in my family, and I knew that religion would not be Catholicism. So I was taking the course to convert, and I felt that Judaism was a more practical religion. I seemed to get answers, whereas in Catholicism, it's like, heaven and hell, and as a little child, you're almost like afraid, if you do something, you're going to go to hell, and then you have to go to confession. Well, as a 7-year-old, what are you going to confess? So anyway, my father didn't want me to convert.
had a lot to confess.
My father didn't want me to convert. He kept on begging me, come and speak to the priest. I said, I'm not speaking to a priest. And then he came around.
And you were how old at this time?
I was 23.
Okay, and then Willie, what are you thinking about her conversion? And you weren't married yet, right?
Right.
Right.
Right. So what are you thinking as she decides that for you, she's willing to go and become Jewish? So you must have been pretty honored.
It was a period of a lot of tension and stress, but I was overwhelmed to a certain extent that somebody would go to that extent to be with me. So, and she's still here. So,
So
what can I say? I don't know. I feel at times I'm indebted to her.
I think,
And I have to tell you,
Marianne, I just love your smile. It's just so beautiful. So, but I wanted to ask you, because you wouldn't believe how time is flying here, but I wanted to ask you both, and I kind of have your answer. So I ask everyone who I do an interview with, this question is that when you brought your spouse home to and in your case, Willie, your Holocaust surviving parents, what was their reaction? And in most cases, you were really like one of the very few people that have been not Jewish in this kind of era of post-Holocaust family units being built. So, Willie, what was it like when you brought Marianne home to your family, and how challenging was that initially to take that step, or was it easy?
It was difficult. Though surprisingly, it's more common than it was more common than you think. I did at the time. I didn't think so, but since then I've learned that that's not the case. But I would.
I figured you're going to answer something. You have something to say.
Don't worry. She'll give her version always. And no, I was nervous, and yeah, I did not know how they were going to react.
And how did they?
They said they were disappointed, but they were okay with it. And I think partly because she was going to convert, and I think that made a difference. But I would say there was some discomfort on their part for a little while.
So I love to do what I do. So I'm going to drill a little bit further into this. So your mother you described as very warm and enriching. Your father was sort of on the gray side of the black lane. So what was your father's impression of Marianne coming into the family, and what was your mother's impression? There had to be different.
Um, my mother's approach was, if you love her, then I will love her. It's, sort of that kind of thing. My father, he was such a complicated man. Um, what was it? What was his reaction?
And now you have your chance.
I kind of go blank on this for some reason.
Okay, first of all, can I just go back to converting?
Absolutely.
They were very supportive to the point that Willie's mother would sit and listen to me practice my prayers.
Oh, nice.
They were very, very supportive. So when he brought me home, he didn't say anything about me. Just my name was Mary Ann. The first time I met them was at a Seder. So here I go. I can't read any Hebrew. I had never been to a Seder. And I'm sitting there like, I have no idea what's going on. And Willie's father is sitting at the head of the table. And every time I looked at him, he winked at me. And they weren't happy, but they didn't want to lose Willie. Willie was more important. And I think they were impressed that I was converting, but also taking it seriously.
And how long was your conversion process?
It was a year.
And how supportive was the rabbi? Was it, where are you, conservative or?
At the time, we were conservative. We're reformed now. So the rabbi that was teaching the course went to Israel. That's why the course kind of finished earlier. He was horrible. He would say to us, you're just converting because you want to get married. You're not going to make good Jews. He would have a pencil on his desk. If somebody was reading and he didn't like the way they were reading a prayer, he would throw it at them. And so another rabbi took over. He went to Israel, and the other rabbi was very sweet. He did the final exams, and
what can you explain to the audience, even to myself, what is a final exam when you're converting to Judaism?
So it's oral. It's talking about what you've learned. There's history. Because this other rabbi took over, we actually didn't have a written exam. It was all oral. And the course was history of the Jews. It was reading and Hebrew, learning the prayers.
So when you married and became Jewish, was there any anti-Semitic feelings that were directed towards you, that you weren't a born Jew?
There was somebody made a comment once at a party. He said I looked like a pork chop at a Jewish wedding.
And that Jew-on-Jew hatred continues to this day, so it's quite amazing.
People have said to me, about my name. It's not a Jewish name. People have made comments not knowing that I was Jewish. But
they weren't anti-Semitic comments. They were the other way.
Yeah, I'd have to say no.
Okay, our next kind of area that we want to talk about is your marriage. When did you start to have children? As parents as a parent of a Holocaust survivor and as a wife of a son of a Holocaust survivors, I'd like to understand a little bit about what you carry, Willie, from your parents. And you indicated early on that they struggled, they had horrors. They both had different reactions to being a survivor. Why don't you describe a little bit of what your growing up life was like in your parents' survivor home?
Um, I tend to describe my parents were sort of loving, almost smothering, but also distant. They were very much focused on providing basic needs.
What was your father's career?
My father was he was in the back before the war. He was a butcher. He sold chickens, and when he came here, that was the first work that he did, and eventually bought his own business. He had like variety stores and things like that. And so and he also worked very hours. Then, their focus was on housing, food, clothing, basic needs. Um, Not so much sort of emotional support. Um,
Did they ever talk about the Holocaust?
my mother was relatively open, except for where she kind of goes blank and doesn't remember things. My father did not. He did talk about it, but only little bits and pieces. He would get very emotional and even sometimes start to cry. So you just don't ask questions. My father carried a lot of grief um, when as a result of the loss of his family, and and I felt we were at times as just a replacement for his first family. And he was so traumatized by that loss that we were all growing up, and even as an adult, he didn't talk much other than the fact that he had a wife and one daughter, which is what we always assumed. He talked about his daughter Leah over and over again. And when I started doing research into a memoir and looking at the family's history, I was shocked.
Why don't you mention the memoir that you wrote? Because we want to.
Okay, so I started 2021 working on a memoir in family history. And so this is the book. It's called Out from the Shadows: Growing Up with Holocaust Survivor Parents. And so there's some, and so a lot of this is covered in there. So my parents weren't there for me when I had an issue at school. When growing up, my dad always talked about the daughter he lost, and that was our understanding. And then when I started doing the research for the book, um, I I had and I was doing a lot of digging up in the archives and database and things like that, and things didn't seem to add up because I couldn't figure out when he was married and when his daughter was born. He always talked about his daughter being 4 years old, and I was trying to figure out 4 years old when, and so there was a lot of people, whose ancestors were from Poland have accessed a database called JRI Poland. And so I contacted them and asked for all the records from the town of Benzine, sort of from 1930 on. And I was hoping to get the birth registration and marriage registration. So it came back and gave me the date my father was married to his first wife, and the birth date of two daughters, which none of us realized. And so and as I sat down and started digesting all of this and processing it, I realized that, at first I thought maybe he did not know, that maybe he was deported before the second daughter was born and didn't realize that he had a second daughter. Like, all kinds of things went in my mind. Well, why wouldn't he mention it? And so, jumping forward in 2022, we went to Poland, the two of us, and I went to the city hall and got out of the archives the actual registrations.
And you went to Poland for the purpose of just relaxation, or you went to research for your book?
It was a combination of both. And so, my intent was also to come back with more information. And when they brought out these were handwritten registers. And when they brought them out, I could see that my father had signed the birth registrations for both children. So it was not that he didn't know. And so
When did your parents pass?
my father passed away in 2008, my mother in 2011. So they were no longer around. And I realized it finally hit me that my father was so traumatized that he had my father never mentioned the existence of his second daughter. We had no clue. And I realized that he had been so traumatized, he just buried that memory. And so, and as it turns out, nobody was 4 years old, because I sort of worked from the birth dates to the date in which I knew they were deported based on historical documents. That one perished at 11 months, the younger one, and the older one that he claimed was 4 years old died at 27 months. But in his mind, he didn't know what happened or anything like that, and she was, and I, based on
And they never spoke about it.
no.
Your mother neither.
I don't think my mother knew either.
I see.
Nobody knew, and it kind of, even to this day, kind of, how did it never ever come up? But it's trauma, and it speaks a lot to the how horrific people's experiences are and how it impacts on them. And so, we'll go back to what life was like growing up. I was part of a replacement family. Parents were like smothering at times, but not prepared for parenthood. Certainly not in North America. And so for many, I was basically often left on my own to work things out.
What made you decide that you wanted to write?
She kind of talked me into it. So I really did not want to. And then she kind of pushed me. I remember the first time I tried to write my parents' story. There's two stories. I knew so much that I ended up filling up an 1,800 word blog post. That was all I did, nothing more. And so I started becoming curious myself and going like, all those things I didn't know. My father never spoke about his. My mother spoke about her childhood, but not my dad. I had no idea what his life was like. I didn't even know the names of his siblings that had perished. Obviously, I knew the names of his siblings that lived. I met them all, but not the ones that perished. I knew he had lost two sisters. I dug up their names as well, and their birthdays, and so as I started becoming curious, I actually I always began to get very obsessed and decided to write it up. And
How
then I
long did
decided, you know
how,
what?
how long did it take you to write your book? Research from start to finish.
I would say about 2 years, but even today I dig up stuff
Mhm.
and going, oh, I would have put this into the book as well, but it never kind of, the research never really ends. You keep digging to see, because this kind of a book is full of blanks. So, and you tell the story from what you know. You can't make up things you don't know. And then it's not nonfiction, it's a fiction book. And so you're always obsessed about um, those missing pieces. And so at the end, I decided I was writing this for myself, not just for myself, but for my family. Because if I don't know, nobody knows.
Right.
And
And so how long, who published it or was it self-published?
so your story needs to be both unique and compelling and has the potential to sell a lot of books. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good it is, they won't be interested. So you have to be realistic about um, how um, how popular your book might be, and then there's a sort of a hybrid version which is not self-publishing, which is there are smaller publishing houses, such as the one that I used, that you can.
And the name of that one is?
It's called Amsterdam Publishing. They are the largest publisher of Holocaust memoirs.
And then I want to understand if their world, your parents' world, affected you, how? Same with you, Marianne. And then I'll ask you, since you have how many children? One, two,
What?
one. Do you think that your her grandparents, your parents, has affected her, and has the Holocaust been intergenerational in that it affected you in which way? You see that, what's your daughter's name?
Sarah.
So you see Sarah, and you see Sarah and how she reacts and behaves under certain circumstances. And does Sarah have children? I think they do. You have grandchildren.
Yeah.
And how do you see this carrying through? You talk about epigenetics when we first started. I spent a lot of my time studying this as well. I've done a lot of documentaries and film on this subject. You participated in one called Generations Apart. So walk me through a little bit about who you are.
Okay, so a couple things. One of the things, whether it was verbal or otherwise, what partly verbal, but mostly probably inherited was this thing about not standing out, not being noticed, which is usually a negative, has a negative connotation in a concentration camp. And so I kind of, my career, I kind of never, I tried to avoid the spotlight. Times that was kind of harder to do. So as I gained, as I started gaining recognition for some of the work I did, it caused a little bit of anxiety for me. I just didn't enjoy it. So, and I sort of learned to step into the spotlight. It's kind of sort of a little bit reflects in the title of the book, where I finally came out of the shadows.
Can you, Marianne, just hold it up for a few minutes while Willie talks, that'd be great. Just like,
So
yep, just like, yep.
I I think I grew up because I was sort of left too much on my own, very insecure, almost in survival mode.
Thank you.
I learned I learned to build up sort of a wall between me and other people. Did not let people get too close to me. I learned to distrust people from my dad. Um,
And Marianne, do you see it the same way, or do you see differences or ads?
I do see it the same way.
Okay.
and
Well, if you took this further and you go to Sarah, and if Sarah was with us here on this call, what would you think she would say as an answer to that question? And how do you see Sarah reacting in certain situations that could definitely indicate signals of intergenerational survivor trauma?
She tends to be hyper vigilant. I'd say she's inherited some of the depression my mother had. I did not talk about that, but my mother had a fair amount of depression.
Sarah suffers from depression.
Um, and
But neither one of you do. So it jumped.
no, that's right. It jumped, but not. It jumped past me, but not from my siblings.
Mhm.
Um, and there's little things that I notice that it has been passed on to my daughter.
Like
Sometimes
She doesn't like to draw attention to herself.
right.
She is very quiet. She's not outgoing at all.
She pushes people away too.
She pushes people away. She's always in the periphery.
And she's married also, correct?
Yes, she's married with 2 little boys.
And her husband is Jewish or not Jewish?
Jewish.
And does he have any related connection to the Holocaust?
No, he he came from the Ukraine with his mother and sister.
Okay, but nothing from, all right. And then your sibling what's her name?
Tamara.
Is that your sibling?
Yeah. So I have an older sister Tamara. I'm a younger brother Irv.
Okay, so she's 4 years older than you, I think. And
Right.
and Irv is how much younger?
He's 2 years younger.
So when you get together, and I mentioned this movie called Generations Apart, which I think it's an excellent one. And by the way, I wanted to remind you, you talk about being Catholic and growing up, and you talked about Passover. A really good clip that you can find on YouTube is from Sebastian Maniscalco, where he talks about being Catholic, being Italian, and having Passover Seder for the first time because he married into an intergenerational interfaith marriage. And he didn't convert. And he goes for the very first time being married, he goes to a Passover Seder. It's hilarious. You should watch it. And so your siblings, when you get together, do you see intergenerational trauma in your older sister, Tamara, and your younger brother?
Definitely. And with each of us, I think it manifests itself quite differently. My sister is probably the most damaged. Suffers a lot of depression. I'd say low self-esteem. She tends to be self-destructive. She has really difficulty in maintaining relationships with people because she's so hard to deal with. My brother is much like my dad was. which is difficult to get along with, controlling, manipulative, and not a lot of empathy. And so we're sort of all quite different.
So, Marianne, you're sort of the insider outsider to all this. So you have a very interesting perch on which to look at this family, since you didn't come through you came through the Catholic world and converted. You're very close to Judaism. You've been a rabbi's assistant, and that has probably changed your life in many ways, mostly positive. And the empathy of seeing all the kind of life events that he or she has to produce in front and be up for. How would you tell Willie what you envision and see throughout the lives of how many, you said 40 or so? How many years have you been together?
45, it'll be 45.
45 years.
It'll be 44.
So, and you have to be mum on this, Willie, so you can't say anything. You can let Marianne have the floor, and I just want Marianne to be able to have full ability to speak her mind and let me know how she feels about all of this.
His description is very accurate. It was so pronounced to me when I met him because our worlds were so different. I have actually a good funny analogy, and that is in Annie Hall, where they show the two families having dinner. Do you recall those scenes? So there's the Jewish family, and they're yelling, and they're eating with their mouth open, and everybody's talking over each other. And then you have my family, very quiet, eating, not much conversation. And, I remember being at dinners with my mother, and my mother's going, Frank, answer him. He's talking to you. I was very respectful of Willie's parents' past, though I did ask a lot of questions. But as Willie said, his father would become very agitated, and you would just hit a wall. Whereas Willie's mother would do the talking for him. As far as the family dynamics, they're really messed up. They really are.
So are they Everybody Loves Raymond, or are they Seinfeld, or how would you describe, if you could write a sitcom about this 40 years of marriage that you have? What then we're going to conclude on this very important
Our marriage has been good. I mean, we, because we're a Jewish family. Now, we didn't celebrate Christmas. We didn't put up a tree. I mean, clearly Jewish family. Now, it was hard dealing with my parents. We respected them. We would go over for dinner, for an Easter dinner or Christmas dinner, but we didn't celebrate their holidays.
So you had a relationship after you converted with your father.
Yeah, my dad was frosty and continued to be frosty. He warmed up a little bit when I had Sarah, but he wasn't happy. He was a devout Catholic, and I guess I was a disappointment, being the only child, being a girl, going to private Catholic schools, and
Sarah she has two children, right?
Sarah has two little boys, 6 and 8.
There's a place for us somewhere, a place for us, peace and quiet and open air, wait somewhere